My name is Elaine. I was an average teenager finishing school with dreams of getting into college. I'd had a crush on Ben, the most gorgeous guy in my school, since middle school, but I'd never had the guts to approach him. He was one of those silent, brooding types. That made me want to get close to him even more. That was easier said than done. Ben wasn't a part of any clubs and he showed no interest in making friends. I was afraid that he'd just shoo me away, so I decided to slip him a note and ask him out on a private date. If he didn't want to go, he could simply ignore me. During a school football match, I sneaked up to the bleachers where Ben sat. I quickly stole his bag. I had seen him carrying it around, so I recognized it easily. I stood under the bleachers where no one would see me. Then I unzipped the bag to slip my handwritten note inside. The moment I saw what was in his bag, I shrieked and I dropped it on the ground. I knew I wasn't supposed to draw attention to myself, but I couldn't stop screaming. There was a snake in Ben's bag. A snake! I turned to run away and slammed into someone who was standing behind me. "What are you doing?" he demanded angrily. "Is that my bag?" I couldn't breathe. Snake, I managed to whisper. Snake! Under the bleachers! Ben looked at me and sighed. I watched him walk behind the snake and grab the empty bag. I begged him to be careful, but he seemed to know what he was doing. He shocked me by lunging forward and grabbing the snake by its head. I had to scream again. The sight of the snake's enormous fangs was just too much. "Stop yelling," Ben said before throwing the snake back into his bag with considerable force. Then he zipped it shut and hung the bag on his back as if it had nothing more than books inside. Ben asked me why I was peeping into his stuff. He asked me if they sent me. I didn't know what he was talking about, and I told him that, but he didn't seem to believe me. He demanded to know if I was searching for his father. Why would I be searching for his father? I showed Ben the note that I had written and explained why I stole his bag. He seemed relieved by seeing the note, and he requested me not to tell anyone about the snake. I told him I wouldn't tell anyone if he could explain to me why in the world he was carrying a snake in his backpack. I demanded to know the truth. Ben said he couldn't speak freely here. He asked me to meet him in the parking lot after school. We would drive to his house. With that, he left me standing there in awe. Had I just gotten the weirdest date ever with Ben? I met Ben in the parking lot after school, and he drove us to his house, which was only a few blocks away from my own. I asked him why we couldn't simply talk outside, but he told me to hold my questions till we were in a secure location. I was getting a bit nervous, but the fact that I was so close to my own house made me feel better. We reached his house and entered the mansion. It was gloomier and older than ours. I asked him where his parents were. He told me his mother passed away when he was young. His father spent all his time in his lab in the basement. Ben took me up to his room and shut the door behind him. Ben told me his room was soundproof, and he was sure it wasn't being bugged. We were alone. I couldn't hold my curiosity anymore. I let all my questions spill out at once. Ben told me that his father was working on an important secret mission. He'd asked Ben's help in this mission, which involved catching some poisonous snakes that lurked around this side of the city. I was horrified to learn that the snake was poisonous. I could have really died. I asked Ben why he was doing something so dangerous for his dad. What mission could be worth this? He refused to tell me. He said he couldn't trust me yet. Ben took the snake in his bag and placed him in a tank in another room. There were a few more snakes in that tank. They were the snakes he'd caught that week. The rest were housed permanently in his dad's lab. Ben said he didn't mind catching them so much. They were interesting creatures to him. He began to tell me more about them, and I couldn't help but listen. This was, hands down, the most interesting boy I'd ever met in my life. He told me the names of the snakes and all about their individual personalities. He said he usually caught the snakes after school. This was crucial work for his father. He was confident that with it, they could change the world. He said this work often made him lonely, though. It was very important to his father that all of this stay hidden, so he had to spend a lot of his time after school by himself. I was the only friend he'd made in years. I offered to help him catch his snakes and keep him company. He asked me if I was insane. Why would I want to help him, a strange guy, catch terrifying creatures? I told him that I was intrigued by him and the work he was doing. I wanted to learn more about snakes, maybe see him catch one. Ben seemed hesitant at first, but he came around quickly. He said he couldn't believe how well I was taking all this. I'd had a crush on Ben for way too long to let a few snakes ruin it. He dropped me home and we agreed to meet the next day. Our connection grew stronger quickly. I would meet him after school every day and we would go hunt for snakes. We would go to the forest, abandoned construction sites, and riversides, anywhere these pesky creatures could make home. With my company, Ben overcame his loneliness. He was grateful to me for not judging him for this work and enjoyed my company thoroughly. He could be his true, goofy self around me, and he loved that. Ben was funny, intelligent, and sensitive in an honest, unique way. I was simply crazy about him. He loved animals and taught me so much about the world that we shared with him. I wanted nothing more than to be with him. I no longer cared what his father's great secret was, but Ben did. One day, he sat me down in his room, looking incredibly serious. He said that over our time together, he had begun to have feelings for me. He said he'd never met anyone that he could be his true self with until now. I nearly swooned with joy. I told him that I too had feelings for him. Ben didn't look as excited as me, though. He said that being involved with him was dangerous, that if I really wanted to be around him, I had a right to know the truth about his father. The whole truth. He trusted that even if I chose to leave, I wouldn't betray his trust. He began to speak, but was interrupted by sounds of heavy footsteps. "Who is this young lady?" came a voice. Ben and I turned to see a man. "Dad, she's a friend," Ben said. His outlook changed from relaxed to alert, while I made sure I was presentable, meeting his father for the first time. "A friend? I'm sorry to disturb you, but can you do what I asked you to do earlier? I'll keep her company." Ben nodded and went inside while his father sat beside me. "I am so happy to see him making friends," he said. I nodded my head and smiled. "Yeah, he has been so lonely since his mother passed away." His dad looked so sad. I wanted to tell him that I'd never leave Ben, but maybe it wasn't the time. "Oh, he never mentioned his mom. What happened?" I asked. "She died because she couldn't get treatment in time. Now I devote myself to make sure that the same never happens again, no matter what I have to do," he said, and he got up, wiping tears off of his eyes. "It's late. You should go home." I took the hint and got up. That's when Ben came back. He walked me home but kept silent, so I did the talking. "Your father is a great man," I said. "Your home is here," Ben said. Before I could say something, he pulled me into a hug. It was blissful until I felt him slip something into my hand. "Open it when you're alone," he whispered. Before I could open it, he rushed away. Once I was in my room, I opened the note. Ben finally told me the whole story. His father was collecting these snakes in order to manufacture antidotes for their venom. He was making several thousand vials, preparing for a massive outbreak of snake bites in town. His father was the one creating the outbreak. He was going to take all the snakes that they had captured and release them into a very posh, high-income area in our town. I was horrified by this. They were going to release poisonous snakes in an area with people? That was terrible. Ben explained that these snakes already existed throughout the town. The rich people here had cleared their own area of them and left the snakes to bite the poor people. One of these venomous snakes had been the cause of his mother's death all those years ago. The hospitals owned by the rich refused to manufacture antidotes because they were cheap compared to the extensive treatment they provided for snake bites. The same treatment had failed on Ben's mother and she died, leaving his family broken forever. Moments after I finished reading the note, I learned that my parents were planning a weekend at a resort in a posh area of the town, a part that could be flooded by poisonous snakes any day now. I tried to convince my parents to change their plan, but they'd already made their reservations. There was no way I was going to put them at risk, so I had to come clean. My parents were furious. Boys, vigilantes, poisonous snakes, these were all the things I was supposed to avoid. They called the cops immediately, in spite of me begging them to wait. They alerted them about the plan Ben's father had made. The cops arrived within minutes and forced me to tell them the whole truth. They immediately took off to Ben's house, but the entire mansion was empty. No snakes were found in the building, nor did they find Ben or his father. I couldn't believe this. Where were they? I found a note on their front porch which said, "I know what you did, Elaine. If you cooperate with the cops, I will fill your house with snakes. Ben." Suddenly, I was terrified. Had Ben found out that I'd tipped off the police? How? My head started to spin as I looked at the note. This wasn't Ben's handwriting. I read and reread the note and became certain about one thing. Ben didn't write this note. He may have been brainwashed by his father, but he was not a threatening person. Perhaps his father wrote this. Ben must have told him about me after he kicked me out. After all, I had been so against the plan that he must have gotten scared that I would rat him out, which I did. I immediately alerted the police officer about this, and they put out a search to find Ben and his father. I told the police they should increase security near the posh areas of the town. If Ben's father knew he was going to get caught, he could have decided to implement his plan early. The police thanked us for our help, and we went back home. When my mom, dad, and I entered our living room, we nearly had a stroke. Our living room was full of slithering snakes, countless snakes creeping and crawling all over our furniture. In the center of it all stood Ben's father. He had a gun in his hand. I knew it was him because he looked exactly like Ben, just older and worn and angry. He accused me of ruining his life and lives of thousands of other people that his antidote would have saved. He said I seduced his son to derail his plan, and he would get back at me for that. I called him sick and twisted for manipulating his son. I demanded to know where Ben was. He laughed at me. He told me Ben would never choose to be with me. He was dedicated to him, his father, and the plan they'd made for this town. Didn't he care that he was ruining Ben's life? He would land up in jail or worse if this thing got out of control. My questions didn't affect him. He said we all had to do bad things for the greater good. We all had to make sacrifices. He was ready to do his duty. Suddenly, the door of our house busted open and police officers filtered into our home like ants. Ben's father tried to run out of the house, but the police had surrounded our house and they restrained him within seconds. We ran out of our snake-ridden house. I yelled at Ben's father to tell me where Ben was, but I didn't need to. Ben was standing right behind me. I turned around when he called my name. My heart was racing in my chest. Ben was here. I raced up to him and hugged him tightly. How did he get here? What was going on? Ben revealed that after my fight with him, he'd gone to meet his father. He was worried that I would reveal their plan, and he felt like he had a right to let his dad know. When his father declared that he would hunt me down and silence me, Ben got frightened. For the first time, he could see the cruel hardness in his father's eyes. This was a man who would do anything to get what he wanted, no matter the price. Ben tried to stop his father from coming after me, but he wouldn't listen to reason. He was convinced his son had been deluded by childish feelings. He told Ben he was implementing his plan early and asked him to load the snakes into his truck. He was going to release the snakes and avenge his wife's death. He had gone mad with grief, Ben realized. He just didn't see it before. Any effort to stop him was useless. There was only one thing left for Ben to do. It was to destroy his father himself. It was Ben who'd tipped off the police about his father's attack on our house. He'd revealed everything to them in exchange for immunity from prosecution. He'd saved the lives of my whole family. My family was eternally thankful to Ben, especially my mom. We got Ben to stay with us in our house while his father was in jail. The police charged his father with conspiracy to murder, animal cruelty, and about 10 other smaller crimes. He was sentenced to jail for 10 years.